Hey everyone, Andang here on a bridge inside of northern Mirkwood, and as we can see if we look down, there is a rushing river down there and a bunch of malorn trees because we are right outside of the Elf King's Hall, and it is right up here. Let's go ahead and go inside. And inside we are greeted with quite an impressive entrance, but not really any of the architecture that we haven't seen before in other areas. There are cool statues and things like that, but it feels just like an underground version of things that we have seen before in previous elf areas, but that doesn't mean it's not subject to change, as this is the beta, so there could be all sorts of new assets and things. And, you know, this is some of the less or used elven architecture, so there's at least that going for it, but it still feels like stuff that we have seen before. And as you can see, there's just a bunch of different tunnels inside that lead off in different directions, so let's follow them and see where they go. And as we make our way deep inside the Elf King's halls, we can see that there are many stalactites and stalagmites coming through and meeting together in the middle, and it's pretty cool looking. I really like how this cave looks. It's very simple though, there's not that much extra look like you would get from, say, the Glittering Caves or even inside Moria. It's a very basic but useful seeming place inside the Elf King's halls. And speaking of the Elf King, there is King Thranduil in the distance, and he does have a quest for us, it would seem. But man, he's got pretty cool armor and looks a lot like the some of the armor we've seen Legolas wearing in the past, which I think is a pretty cool tie-in since they are related. And of course, it wouldn't be an elf cave without some sort of trees and, you know, greenery and just things living inside. And so we can see that they are making use of crystals and also a giant gaping hole in the ceiling to be growing all sorts of stuff inside of the Elf King's halls, and it's pretty cool. And as you can see, there's just a really long tunnel up there that goes up to light, so pretty cool. And down below Thranduil's halls, there are of course the dungeons, which have been made famous by The Hobbit and that entire storyline. Of course, many of you know this is where the dwarves were kept along with Bilbo, and it's pretty cool just to see this place here, knowing the story significance by such an iconic place, even though it is pretty boring. But, you know, elf prisons probably are pretty boring, so I'll give them a pass with that. And finally, we have the barrel room, and my goodness, there are so many barrels in this place. It's pretty impressive. Of course, spoiler alert for The Hobbit if you haven't read it yet or seen the movies, but they make it out of here inside barrels, and it's pretty cool that there's just this many inside here, and it's just a giant room filled with barrels to the brim, it feels like, even though they're not stacked that high, but they're just everywhere, all over this place. And you can tell elven productivity seems to be a thing at Thranduil's house, at least, because they're quite busy taking care of, you know, all these goods that they're going to be shipping down river. And at the very end of all the barrels, in the very back, there is the trapdoor here that is quite famous, and also a barrel here, which, as we can see if we highlight over it again, requires friend standing to use. But apparently there is an empty apple barrel that seems like a great place to hide. Well, that sounds like just a great idea. So apparently we're going to be going on a barrel ride once we reach friend standing. Can't wait to see that when the update finally comes out. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm now going to jump over to look at Mirkwood stuff, just looking throughout Mirkwood areas, but I do real quick want to say that aside from the barrel room and a couple other areas, Thranduil's halls are pretty boring compared to previous areas we've seen in Middle-earth as far as new assets and things like that. Now keep in mind, you know, this is still beta. For example, there are, you know, swans on these, or some type of bird, which I think is still from the Gondor area, so it's possible they could be changing the caps on those and things like that. So, you know, this is very much still beta. This is probably one of the earlier versions of beta I've seen, as far as, you know, whenever I've previewed, I've seen them have stuff be very complete and be very much not, and it feels like this one still has a long way to go, so it feels like there's still quite a bit that they need to be doing, at least with some of the areas. Other areas, like Lake Town, for example, look like that they are ready to, you know, be going out tomorrow, basically, so we'll be taking a look at that in later videos as well, but first, let's go to Mirkwood and take a look at how things are there. And here we are deep inside Mirkwood. As you can tell, there are these markers showing the elf path, and I've gone across as much as I can see of this thing, and by the way, it's a really, really long path through Mirkwood. There's just so much territory that they're covering in this update, and so far there have been no enemies on the path, as there are supposed to be per the books, which I think is pretty cool. There are enemies off to the sides, as wolves and other like placeholder mobs and things like that, which I'm sure they're going to be changing soon, but it looks like they're doing a pretty good job with Mirkwood. It's really dark in here, which I think is great. Of course, there is, you know, light coming through in a few places, but for the most part, this is a very, very dark forest. Darker than we've seen anywhere else in LOTRO, and the reason I bring that up is because a lot of people were complaining back when Southern Mirkwood came out that it just wasn't a dark forest. It didn't really feel as close and like tied in as it should be, and part of that was because of Sauron's deforestation policy. Oh hey look, there actually is a bear on the path. Well, apparently he has migrated onto the path, so we're just gonna go around him. But because of Sauron's deforestation policy, there weren't as many trees in Southern Mirkwood and things like that. And here's an open area here. I think we're coming near the end of the forest here. But a pretty cool entrance there. Really like that. And finally, my last piece of advice would be to not stray from the path, and if you do, certainly don't go in the water because it can get quite dark here inside Mirkwood. As many of you know, the water is bad news in Mirkwood, and then having to fight things while inside it gets even worse. As you can see, it is actually the Shadow of Mordor is what it still shows, but it's basically that same effect, but it'll be the Mirkwood version once it's fully set up. And it just makes things even darker than they were before inside of Mirkwood, which is actually pretty cool. It's nice to just see this incredibly deep black here inside Mirkwood. So, final thoughts of this area. I think that it is a good addition to LOTRO. There's not too much new stuff there, but it does really capture the feeling that you get from the books, and I think it did a really good job of that. So I'm really enjoying the Elf King's Halls and Northern Mirkwood. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought of this new area, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like, and I'll see you again real soon for more of Update 22.